Hey everybody, so we're still talking about whether or not the government can fix the economy, and even if the government should fix the economy, if it can, should it be responsible for us, the citizens, or should we be responsible for ourselves? So that's what we're looking at here in this video for Chapter 10, Lesson 2. And I want to set the stage here for you, just so you understand kind of what we're taking a look at. Roosevelt took office, if you remember, first in 1932. So here we have Roosevelt starting out in 1932, and he had those series of acts and bills that were known as the New Deal. So when we get to 1936, when we're going to have a next election for president, what we're looking at here is whether or not Republicans can convince people to vote FDR out and vote their candidate, Alfred Landon, in. Now, the way this is going to work, and really the way we have to think about it, is that there were a whole bunch of people that would vote for Roosevelt because he did things for them during his first term. So, for example, white Southerners, immigrants, progressives, all of these people benefited from the programs that FDR put into place in the New Deal. So they're going to all vote for FDR. He's going to send his wife out, Eleanor Roosevelt, to convince African Americans. And really, Alfred Landon, the Republican, he doesn't convince anybody to really vote for him, except really the states of Vermont and Maine. So like you look at this map down here, this is the map that was in the election of 1936, and anything in blue votes for Roosevelt, and the two states in red vote for the Republican Landon. So Roosevelt is going to start and take over again with more than 60% of America saying, we want Roosevelt. And you can understand why. The first New Deal creates millions of jobs. The unemployment rate falls more than 10%. And so really when we look at 1936, America's in a better place. Like here's the chart for the unemployment rate, and you can see this is when Roosevelt takes over in 1932, and they begin to spend a lot of money on these programs, so that by 1936, here we are. The unemployment rate has fallen 10%. Things are definitely better off than what they were before. But FDR does believe that even though things have been good during his first term, there's still a lot more work that has to be done. So he's going to push through a number of different acts, such as the National Housing Act, or the Fair Labor Standards Act, or even the Farm Security Administration. All of these designed to help get people back to work. And here's how he says it. I see 1/3 of a nation, and I'll circle it for you down here, ill-housed, ill-clad, ill-nourished. And this is your short answer. It's this quote. The test of our progress isn't that we should give more to those that already have it, but whether we should give to those who have too little. So he's going to really push through a whole series of new programs that he calls the Second New Deal, like the Fair Labor Standards Act, National Housing Act, or the Farm Security Administration. Now, of course, if you're going to do all these new programs, these Second New Deal programs, that's what those programs are, then how do you pay for it, right? And remember, you can either pay for something with taxes, right, or with loans. And each of those comes with its own problems. Remember, that's one of the reasons why Hoover was so worried about the government spending all of this. Well, Roosevelt says, forget it. We've got to get the country back on track first. We'll worry about paying things off later. So what Roosevelt decides to do is called deficit spending. And what he says is, what we need to do is forget about paying for it. We're just going to borrow what we need from the banks and pay it back later. So here's an example of what this might look like. Let me get this up out of the way. All right. So here's all of the money that Roosevelt brings in under taxes. That's called revenue, and really it's just a fancy way for saying taxes. And here's all of the things Roosevelt's going to spend money on with his first and second New Deals. Those are expenditures, and these are way higher than what we're bringing in on taxes. So you have to find a way to balance that. You've got to borrow the rest in a loan, and this is called deficit spending, because you're spending money you don't have and you need a loan. So Roosevelt, of course, engages in this, and Republicans really don't like this. They think it's too much regulation, it's giving way too much power to the president. But the people support him. 60% of America voted for him. So, Republicans kind of have to deal with with what they get. So let's take a look here at how Roosevelt, in his second term, now that the second New Deal is underway, how does he get these people back to work? What does he do? One of the ways he puts Americans back to work is the Works Progress Administration. This is going to be the largest public works program of the New Deal, bigger than the PWA, which we looked at yesterday. 8.5 million Americans are at one point or another going to get a job here with the WPA. And they build so much: roadways, buildings, airports, bridges, parks, thousands upon thousands of these things. And they even offer work to artists, musicians, and theaters, and people, and writers. These are the kinds of organizations that employed people like Dorothea Lange, who took the picture of that migrant mother. And really the goal here is that by putting people to work, we're going to build up their confidence. So we're going to get more and more Americans to work to drop that unemployment level down even more. But there's a problem with all of this. You see, even though the Republicans in Congress, who didn't like the New Deals, couldn't change anything, the Supreme Court could. The Supreme Court at the time was very conservative and Republican. So, when the Congress and the Republicans in Congress aren't able to stop Roosevelt, what they do is they sue. And they say that President Roosevelt doesn't have the power to make the Farm Credit Administration or the Public Works Administration or the Works Progress Administration or any of these things we've talked about. So the Supreme Court hears this court case, and they say that one of Roosevelt's programs that he had made, the National Recovery Administration, was against the law, that Roosevelt had no right to create this program. Only Congress should have made this program, not the president. And they strike it down. They say, no more. You cannot have this program. That makes the Republicans want to sue for all these other programs too and get rid of them as well. So Roosevelt needs to come up with new ideas, new programs, if he wants to get support for the next time he runs for president in 1940. So what's he going to do to keep people supporting him as we approach 1940? And the answer there is look for ways to help workers. For example, one law that Congress wants to pass is the Wagner Act. And it's really interesting because it says to people for the first time ever that you actually have a right to join a union. That had never really been in the law before. People had just been doing it. And it made arbitration official. It said that if you decide to go to arbitration, then you have to do what the decision process is. These are two really big things because prior to this, it hadn't been something the law guaranteed. It was just something you volunteered to do. So when workers discover that Roosevelt will support them and their unions, they decide to strike and get better pay, get more rights. For example, the United Auto Workers began something known as sit-down strikes against General Motors because they wanted better pay. And they sat down in their factory and refused to leave. They refused to leave for days and days. Food was brought up to them with ropes. They were in there for days. And the strike spread to a whole bunch of different factories as they attempted to get better benefits. And it actually ended violently. The Army actually, and the police actually charged the factories and broke in to drag the workers out. But America responded well. America said, you know what? We got to give these union workers the rights they need. So Roosevelt does what he can to help workers, and he also decides that it's time to help the elderly. He says that we need to do something so that the elderly can help care for themselves They don't have to rely on other people. So what he does is, we're going to help not just the old, but also people that really can't help themselves through no fault of their own. Whether you're unemployed, whether you're disabled, whether you're a poor mother. And the idea here is that the federal government should help these people who through no fault of their own can't work. And he calls it Social Security. And Social Security does help a ton of people. They get a monthly paycheck. But there's a ton of people it doesn't help, including farm workers and people that are household workers. That's 65% of African Americans. So why? Why did it not help 65% of African Americans? Because FDR needed white Southerners to support it to get it through Congress, or else it never would have happened. Well, how do you get white Southerners to support you in the 1940s, 1930s? You prevent African Americans from getting the same benefits as white people. Now, even though Social Security does pass, Roosevelt and his advisors don't look at it as if it's some sort of tax that we're paying, because we do pay a Social Security tax every month. And that tax comes out of our paycheck every time we get paid, and it goes to Social Security, and then we'll get that money back when we get older. Roosevelt and his advisors look at it like it's insurance. You think about it like car insurance. Every month I pay money into my car insurance, right? I give my car insurance company money, even though I don't use it. But then, when I do need it, when I have an accident, I get that money back so I can get a new car or get my old car repaired. Social Security is the same thing. You pay into it every paycheck for your entire life, and then when it's time, you get benefits too. That's how that works. This means it's hard to remove or modify because you're paying in every paycheck for the generation that comes before you. So the money that I pay every week into Social Security, that's not for me when I get old. I'm paying Social Security for my dad, for my grandma. When you get a job and start paying Social Security, you're going to be paying for your grandparents. So if anyone ever tries to take away my Social Security and says I can't have it, I'm going to be really fired up because I've been paying for decades for the people that came ahead of me. That way, and doing it that way makes it really hard to get rid of it. No politician's going to probably be ever able to get rid of Social Security. That's just the way it is. We might change it, but we'll never get rid of it because people are always paying in. Anyway, there's some of the ways in which FDR is able to get voters, even though the Supreme Court doesn't like what he does. It's one of the ways he's able to get more Americans back to work, and we'll talk more about it in class tomorrow.